Good afternoon. I'm Lisa Loomis with Mad River Valley TV. And here with me today in our Waitsfield studios is Elwin Neill, who served on the Waitsfield Select Board from 1983 until 2008. Of those 27 years, he spent 21 years as chair of the Select Board and served on the Mad River Valley Planning District for over 20 years. Elwin was chair of the Select Board in Waitsfield during much of the time when Waitsfield was negotiating with Virginia Houston regarding municipal water, and as Waitsfield was beginning to develop its municipal water and septic plan. Elwin, thanks for coming today.
Hi, Lisa.
So let's start with, if you could, one of the statements that Virginia Houston made at a January 21st condemnation hearing was that she came to the town of Waitsfield and offered the town free water forever. What's your recollection of that?
Well, that would have been some of the early on years of probably when Virginia came and bought our land and had decided to drill a well or thought there was water up there. I think she came into the process maybe a little naive of how, I'll give her credit maybe that much, that a little naive of the process, that I think she thought she'd come to the selectmen, we'd do a deal, that would be the end of it, but we have to go through the same process for, her as anyone else, and she would have had to gone through, the Planning Commission at the time, the Board of Adjustment at the time, and in our research and just looking at the process, there was really no mechanism for her to do commercial water extraction in the zone that she owned land in.
So the town's zoning ordinance didn't include any provision for commercial water extraction?
No, it didn't at that time. And so that started another process of, pardon me, of going through another process of changing the zoning ordinance so that it would allow that activity.
And as I recall, that took 3 separate votes: November of 1992, May of 94, and November of 94. And those votes weren't just a simple majority vote, as I recall. There was what was called a 2/3 supermajority petition. And each time a proponent of the amendment could petition for the supermajority, right?
Yes, that was quite the process. Actually,
that was quite the process.
That was
wasn't
quite
it?
the process. The town proposed a change in the ordinance, and it was going to be a conditional use, and that brought out the faction in town that thought it should be a use by right.
We should probably explain. A conditional use is reviewed by what was then the Zoning Board of Adjustment, so it was subject to review under 5 or 6, or actually a whole host of criteria. And if a use were permitted as a use by right, it would not be subject to any review criteria.
That's correct. It would have been just a straight zoning permit,
right.
Get a permit and do your project. But anyway, so it brought out the faction that they thought it was a use by right. The town wanted to propose it as a conditional use, and you can correct me if I missed a little in here because
no, I think you got them right so far.
Because it was quite complicated. And then that brought out the faction that didn't really want anything to happen at all. So they called for the 2/3 majority. They petitioned for the 2/3 majority. So we went through with the first vote, didn't hit the 2/3, everything failed, and then it was kind of a it was quite strange because it was a collaboration of 2 parties that were opposed to each other, but they actually combined to defeat
the Second Amendment.
Defeat the Second Amendment.
Right.
So, but it did finally pass, and it was finally put into the ordinance that commercial water extraction could happen, and then she started to go through the process then.
So during that process, when she came before it's now the Development and Review Board, at the time it was the Zoning Board of Adjustment,
right,
led by Leo LaFerrier, and she had prior to that been to the Planning Commission to get site plan review. Then she came to the Zoning Board of Adjustment. And during those hearings, it's my recollection, because I covered them, those many years ago, that they were packed with townspeople with a lot of concerns about that project
Absolutely. I mean, there was, they were in the town clerk's office and the place was packed. I mean, not only the seating, but, they were standing, they were everywhere. And they were well-attended hearings, and they were either residents that were along the road, there were people worried about traffic, there was people worried about water, there was people worried about, just interested in the project in general.
So it's not really fair for her to have said that the town squashed her trucking. Well, actually, one of her statements quite specifically was that the town, Virginia Houston, said that the town sent letters to the townspeople saying I'd be drying up all the wells in the neighborhood if my project went through. Did the town send any letter like that?
I don't recall that they did send any letter like that. She may have been confused with, having to, the state, did required testing of wells to see when they did do a drawdown of actually testing our wells, which was no different than what we were required to do when the town did when they test pumped the well that they drilled in the Reed Road.
So Virginia Houston ultimately did get a permit for 6 round-trip truck trips per day, with the trucks rolling between the hours of, I think it was 10 and 3, 5 days, or between 8 a.m. and 3 p.m., 5 days a week.
Yeah, and that was those times. As I recall, the times were set up not to coincide when school buses
right.
were running, because they did have to come down off in the common, and there was concern of truck safety coming down the hill, and there was concern for. It was out of the ordinary to have that many large trucks.
Out of the character of that area.
Yeah, and
right.
That was some of the concern of the citizens along the road, and I think the Board of Adjustment tried to address those.
I had forgotten. I just remembered the Supreme Court. Remember the question over whether commercial water extraction could be considered agricultural,
right.
hinged on whether one raised up a crop of water?
That's right.
That was an argument that ended up going all the way to the Supreme Court. And as I recall,
right.
Virginia Houston was the one who took it to the court when the State Agency of Natural Resources
right.
did not agree with her that commercial water extraction is not raising up a crop. Right.
That's correct.
So it is different from
correct.
I'd forgotten that.
There were many precedents.
That was an interesting argument, wasn't it?
Yes.
So then Virginia Houston said at the January 31st meeting that when she went to Northfield to discuss citing her water business in Northfield, but Northfield didn't want to have a fight with Waitsfield. Quote, I told Waitsfield about my plan to go to Northfield, and Waitsfield then put in the 1,700-foot restriction on development and marketed it as protecting the Northfield Ridge. The bulk of my property was then taken away from me. So tell me a little bit about the protective zoning for the Northfield Ridge and how the town came to that position, also by way of several votes requiring two-thirds supermajority, as I recall.
That was a process that started probably 20 years ago. I mean, it was a long process. We had seen high elevation development in Warren. They'd gone up the Roxbury Mountain. We'd seen other high elevation developments happen, and it was a big concern of the Planning Commission at that time that it would, ultimately detract from the area, detract from, actually the aesthetics of why people came, the rural character, why people actually came here. And there again, the process started. It took several votes. It took took a lot of work to get the ridge protected, and quite frankly, I think it's a good thing to have that visual protection. People do comment that it's nice not to see houses clear to the top. We'd seen Williston Williston and other areas. It wasn't just in the valley, but Williston and other areas. If you travel around Vermont, where high elevation development has happened, they've had developments that have gone right to the top of a lot of ridge lines.
Stowe, I remember, being one of the towns that was compared. The valley was compared to,
Stowe,
as if that could happen to us.
But if you look in the Burlington area as you're driving out of Burlington, you don't realize it because it's it's more.
It's more developed in the first place.
Yeah, it's more developed anyway, but if you look, there's a lot of really kind of high elevation development in that area.
So at the time, I'm just looking at the notes I have here, at the time of the discussion with protective zoning on the Northfield Ridge, it affected 20 to 25 landowners. And that's now been consolidated because the town has now owns
Right.
several of those parcels
Yeah,
of land.
the town has been fortunate enough to be able to accept some donations from landowners.
And it doesn't, the zoning doesn't completely prohibit development. It allows traditional hunting and recreational uses above 1,700 feet and allows a residential development as a conditional use between 1,500 and
1,500 and 1,700 feet is conditional.
So
Conditional use allows.
And there have been several people,
Yep.
Mark Kissel included, who ended up with a subdivision
Right.
to develop between 1,500 and 1,700 feet. Okay, so that's protective ridgeline zoning. So then I just want to come back to a topic that did not get mentioned at the public hearing, and that's the issue of a pipeline and Waitsfield sharing a pipeline with Virginia Houston to bring water down, or Waitsfield offering to work with Virginia Houston to get her water down to Route 100. What's your, tell me how that developed.
We tried working with her to allow, if we were going to run water down for a municipal system, sharing the same excavation to put her pipeline into it. Another time, I took a whole day, and at the time, I assumed he was one of her consultants or somebody that was advising her in the development of her water process. But I spent a day with him going across kind of cross-country or across properties that would have gone directly from her wells to the Med River Park. It would have been a shortcut when it had to go down the municipal right away. Spent a whole day with him.
So would that have worked?
Yeah, I think
you would have to buy easements, but
yeah, I think it would have worked fine. There would have been actually only 3 landowners that would have been involved to get to the Mad River Park. And the consultant, at the end of the day, the consultant says, "So what's the problem?" And I said, "Well, there's not a problem on this end."
And so nothing ever came of that?
Nothing ever came of that, that effort there. And then we met with her several times, and we offered low-interest loans. We offered the town to go get, low-interest loans like we did for Evergreen Place up there. The town could have leveraged those funds to do some sort of development like that. To have done the pipeline, even could have got our low-interest loans to do a bottling plant.
And she never took you guys up on that offer? Or?
No, that never came into fruition either. But we did make the effort. We did make the offer.
So this was during the time Waitsfield's water project is under construction right now, but the planning process for that project goes back 20 years or?
Oh, longer than that. The planning process for this and the need for not only this, but the municipal sewer, the wastewater treatment stuff. We've been talking about it. I talked with Dick Brothers one day, and probably 40 years ago they talked about doing it, or more, and it didn't happen. When there was a lot of money and a lot of those municipal projects were going, would have probably been the time to do it, but nobody wanted to do it, nobody got to do it then. They just didn't do it. So since then, we've done needs studies have been done for the town. You name it, it's been done over the years, and it's probably been over a 30-year, at least over a 30-year period.
So you guys the town had worked pretty actively with Virginia Houston throughout that planning process, coming back to her again and again, or?
Well, I wouldn't say, from that whole planning process, not that whole process of, the town developing all of the surveys, developing everything of the needs for, municipal water or municipal sewage. But, we probably have negotiated with her since, the town had been in some sort of negotiation with her probably for 15 years.
And what happened with the concept of the town sharing a pipeline if the town were to bring the water from the Reed Road and put 2 pipelines in one ditch, Virginia's and yours?
At one time, the state didn't think we could do it, but I think it was probably doable. I think it was, easily doable. There's always a way to get something done.
So in addition to the town, did other people in the community or the business community attempt to work with Virginia Houston to?
Yeah, Dick Brothers had spent quite a bit of time trying to facilitate. He hosted a couple different meetings or at least 2 different meetings, probably more. We had, meetings with him at his house at 2 different times, and it was over enough period of time that we were actually at 2 different places that he had built. Yeah, so I mean, it wasn't like it was, just happened once. It happened a couple of times. We'd had some negotiations for quite a while.
So when it didn't work with Virginia, Houston, I'm looking back at these documents that go back to negotiation documents date back to 1998 when the town actually began negotiating. Then the town began talking to the next adjoining landowner, the Jean Damon Rowley Richards family, whose land is also part of this current project that's before the town. And in that instance, the town got so far as to be offering what looks like $500,000 ultimately to to that landowner for access to the water. Is that correct? Does that follow your recollection?
Yeah. We met with Roland Senior, Toby, and we talked with him. Had a great conversation. The select board did with him. We thought that we could do some sort of negotiation that would be, would come to fruition with him. He was interested in, covering his taxes on all of his property. He wanted some sort of, a large enough payment that he could put it into an annuity or something so that it would pay his taxes. That was what he was kind of interested with. And so, but he had to go back to all the rest of the family. And so each time it came back, it became more complicated.
Yeah.
It was kind of decision by committee.
Well, right. How many different properties? 9 different properties, I think I read at the time that you were trying to create enough money to tax abate them.
Right.
Right.
So it got very, very complicated, and we finally decided that we had offered quite a substantial amount of money, and that we had offered some other fringes with it. Picking up some of the tax, some of the transfer tax, legal fees, and we felt that we had probably gone as far as we needed to protect the taxpayers of the town of Waitsfield, and to be in a position where that was a reasonable amount to make everything happen and still be within what we felt was the realm of a reasonable amount of money to make this project viable.
So that took you up until about, I believe
But
it was
also,
04, 05, right?
But I need to clarify that was just not for water, or it was just not for wellhead. It was also it was a 5-acre parcel of land. It was for the water. Plus it was for an easement through his property, which would go right down to where the town storage tank was going to be, the distribution tank was going to be. So it was a lot more than just
what's up subject for condemnation right now.
Right. It was a lot more than just a wellhead, part of an acre or whatever. But that just didn't work out, and
so that takes us up to 2005
so.
when the town ceased its negotiations with Houston and the Richards family and began pursuing the option it ultimately followed, which was to drill its own well in what it thought was a town-owned right-of-way off of the Reed Road. Tell me about that a little bit, how that came to be, the town drilling its well.
Well, we were, sat around a meeting, kind of brainstorming. We had drilled other test wells and on other properties in town. We'd actually drilled a well at the LeClaire pit. We had drilled some wells on the valley floor.
Jack Smith's house.
Yeah,
right?
out and back of Jack Smith's. We drilled 2 or 3 wells out there. We didn't get the volume that we needed. I think they were talking we needed around 150 gallons a minute. None of those wells produced that. None of those wells produced that, if you even added them together. And it was, I said, doesn't the town own the road there? I said, why don't we punch a hole in the road? It's not being used. It's at the end of the road. It's, the 2 property owners can access off that road still to their properties. And so we got a hold of council. Didn't see any reason why the town didn't own the road. Didn't see any reason why we couldn't do it. But state statute also protects municipalities if they want to go onto my property, or if they want to go onto your property, they can actually go onto some person's property if there is a need, and a need had been established, and they can go on and explore for water. And then you go through either a negotiating session or you go through condemnation proceedings.
So the town didn't go through condemnation at the time after drilling the well in 2006 because you were still operating under the assumption it was a town road.
Right.
And you ended up having to buy you had to buy a wellhead protection easement from both of those landowners.
Right, there was some very small pieces of acreage that needed...
0.44 and 0.42.
Right.
So less than a half acre per person.
Right, there was less than a total acre that we needed for the ensuing wellhead protection area for around the municipal well.
And that case, that was challenged by the landowners, and that went to Superior Court, and I can't remember if that one went to Supreme Court or not, but I think it only went to Superior Court, and it was decided in the town's favor, I believe, because it would have been condemned had it not been... You didn't condemn that land, you took it. Did you condemn it?
No, I don't think we hadn't gone through
because it's an easement, you weren't actually taking the land.
Right, we hadn't gone through any condemnation proceedings.
And then the landowners challenged whether the Reed Road is a town road, and after court hearings in November, the judge came back and said,
that's what I understand.
It is not.
I was not on the board, but that's what I read. That's what I read in the paper.
Well, the Valley Reporter's never wrong. So that leaves us where we are today. The town is negotiating with Virginia Houston and with the Richards family for purchasing, I think it's 0.13 and 0.12 acres, a little over an acre from each family, and is simultaneously pursuing condemnation of that land. And condemnation, love it or leave it, love it or hate it, condemnation is not always, but almost always a foregone conclusion if the town can show a need. But I think it's important to also note that the town has a long history of negotiating and trying to work with at least one of the landowners.
It's had an exhausting history. Another thing that should be mentioned too is that when Virginia Houston drilled her first wells up there, she had a lot of water, claimed to have a lot of water flow, which she did have flow, and one of her wells had run for years and years and years. It couldn't cap it, it had run. It actually leaks around the casing, it did. But one of the things that she did, which is kind of what you would do if you had this and you wanted to go into water business, she went to the state and got a huge wellhead protection area. So what that precludes is really any development. So
in all of her land surrounding?
In a lot of her land around there.
Up to 1,500 feet?
Well, it depends on how big the 1,000-foot circle is.
Yeah, because she's up pretty high up there, right?
Right. So, a lot of the development potential has been taken away by her herself because she filed a wellhead protection area with the state.
Right.
When she originally drilled her wells.
So it's a much more complicated story than it is when you sit and listen to both sides.
It's very complicated.
My favorite part were all the 2/3 supermajority votes that had to happen.
Yes, the town. I think the town has put in a tremendous effort. Not only to get her into the water business. They went through all that process, to get it so that we could have commercial water extraction in town. Not just specifically for her, but for other people in town. And then they've gone through other processes which have been well attended, and voted on several times. So it isn't the will of the boards; it's the will of the people of the town. It's had plenty of airing and plenty of voting, and it's been voted on by the people in town. And that is how it got passed. It wasn't passed by a board that was
working in secret.
In secret, or
to take her land away, or take her development options away. So the issue of not of commercial water extraction, the issue of Waitsfield's pursuit of the two pieces of land, one from Virginia Houston and one from the Richards family, will be the subject of discussion at town meeting on March 1st. And specifically, there has been a petition submitted that called for shifting $50,000 of the cost of the municipal water project from system users to all taxpayers in the system. Now, it's my recollection
per year.
It's my recollection that initially, the way the water system was presented to all town voters was that only users would pay for it, and that had been a condition of the loans from the funding agencies.
That was our assumption, yes, at the time, that it was our assumption that they had to be paid for by the users, and that was, that was a condition of I think it was some of the Vermont loans.
Interestingly enough, some of those same funding agencies have now offered a different answer when pressed on whether it's okay to cost shift. They're now saying they don't care because it's secured by the bond vote of the taxpayers of Waitsfield, which is great. Caveat emptor
right.
when you take money from federal and state agencies,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, so but it's a credibility thing with the board now, because the board sold it as it would be users, and if it needs to have a change, it needs to go to all the voters. It can't be voted on from the floor in town meeting. It just is, it just wouldn't be right. I don't believe it would be even binding. So
Right.
It'll have to be an Australian ballot where
It'll have to come back to all the voters at large. So the issue of how this is handled at town meeting is something I think many people in the Valley are watching very carefully to see what happens.
it should be interesting.
It should be a good town meeting. It should be good. Elwin, thank you very much for coming in today, and thank you all for watching, and this will be followed up with Mad River Valley TV's coverage of town meeting. Thank you.
Sounds